A couple different perspectives on that I want to offer. One comes from Tom Peters, who's a well-known management guru. He's the father of the term personal branding. What Tom Peters says about relationships is that the most important personal core competence anyone can have is a rich set of relationships. What Tom Peters is implying here is that if you want to differentiate yourself from the competition, whether that's others who are up for the same job that you're looking at, or others in your profession who may be at competitive businesses, the best thing you can do is build relationships. Incremental improvements in skill sets will help you for sure, but they're not going to help you as much as incremental improvements in your network. So Tom Peters is a believer in this. Another person who believes this is someone very relevant to our conversation here today. And his name is Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn. What Reid Hoffman says about relationships is that the good relationships and alliances that you create define your mutual ability to be effective. Now that's a little bit of a mouthful, especially if you're eating lunch, so I'm going to break that down for you a little bit. What Reid Hoffman is really saying here is that just as your ability to succeed is dependent upon having a good network, those in your network can only succeed with help from you. So when you're looking at this idea of using LinkedIn to build your network, it's not necessary that you think of that as an inherently selfish thing. What you want to do is put yourself out there, not just because it's going to benefit you, but you want to understand how you can be a resource to others, help them, and position yourself where you can be a resource for them. And that's really what LinkedIn is all about. Now, when I explain this to people, there's a very good chance they've heard it before. They understand that relationships are important. They've heard the old adage that it's not what you know, it's who you know. So they get it. However, when it comes to social media, one of the things that people tend to believe is that bigger is better. And they ask me, okay, I get that this relationship thing is important, but why would I spend my time on LinkedIn when a place like Facebook, for example, is much larger? And what's really driving that perception are some numbers. And the numbers are Facebook's size, which is 800 million members worldwide. Comparatively, LinkedIn appears small at 120 million members. However, what I want to encourage you to think about is the fact that bigger is not necessarily better. That it's more a matter of who those members are, what their intent is, and what the tool is used for than simple size. Now, I want to compare LinkedIn to Facebook because Facebook is the place where people tend to go first when looking to use social media and to build their professional network. Now, what I want to say is that I'm a big believer in Facebook. I think Facebook does a lot of things very well, but I don't think it's good for professional networking for a lot of different reasons. And really, that premise starts with an analogy. Facebook's been compared to a lot of different things, but I think the one that's most appropriate is that Facebook is like a pool party, all right? And the reason I say that is first because the intent that people have when they go to a pool party is to have fun. And make no mistake about it, there's a lot of different reasons why people will go to Facebook, but it really boils down to that idea of having fun. They're focused on the play aspect of their life much more so than the work aspect of their life. Another reason why Facebook is like a pool party is you're never quite sure who's going to be in the water there with you. When you go to a pool party, it could be coworkers, friends, neighbors, could be people you don't know all that well. And the same is certainly true on Facebook. Now, to be fair, Facebook has put some standards in place and some privacy controls in place that give you more flexibility in what you share with whom, but for most of us, we're still treating it as if our network is very diverse and sharing the same thing with everyone. And the third reason why I believe Facebook is like a pool party is quite simply that when people go to a pool party, they tend to expose more of themselves than they would or should at work. And you probably have heard this 1,000 times, but the same holds true on Facebook. Now, that's the beginning of why I think Facebook is not the best professional networking tool, but there's more reasons for this as well. Some of this is a matter of how Facebook launched. If you've seen the movie The Social Network, you probably understand fully well that Facebook started as a site exclusively for college students. And it was designed to help people share things in their personal life, in their social life. And while LinkedIn has become much more broad in its scope, and while it's changed over the years, that's still at the heart of what Facebook is all about. Facebook is designed for the personal and play aspects of our lives, not as much for the professional and work aspects of our lives. In addition, one of the limitations Facebook has is you don't always control your own message. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you were to start a Facebook page and your goal was to focus on your professional life and yourself as a professional, and your goal was to use that for professional networking, you would certainly control the content that you share. But the whole nature of Facebook is a two-way conversation, and the wall on Facebook allows for that. So you only control part of the conversation. The people who are visiting your wall, they really dictate the terms of what that conversation becomes. So if they want to post something unrelated to your professional life on the wall, or tag you in a photo that's unrelated to your professional life, they have every opportunity to do that. Now, again, the privacy limitations on Facebook allow you to reel that in somewhat. However, if you overplay the privacy controls, you're really swimming against the tide, so to speak, on Facebook and not using the tool as it is designed to be used. In addition, I believe that things like videos and photos and interests are a double-edged sword. You know, when you start a Facebook page, you're encouraged to share things like your favorite movies, your favorite books, your religious persuasion, your political persuasion. And those things can be a source of affinity. It may be that someone reads those and realizes that they have a common interest, but it's just as likely, and I would say even more likely, that those can short-circuit relationships where people are going to make judgment calls about you based on very superficial information that you've shared. So that to me is a double-edged sword and probably more of a negative than a positive from a professional networking standpoint. And then finally on Facebook, there's simply too much clutter. Facebook, because it's not really designed for one thing, it is designed for everything. It's designed to help people share in their personal life whatever they see fit, so the conversation isn't very focused. Now I want to compare this for a minute to LinkedIn. When you talk about how the site launched, LinkedIn launched exclusively as a professional networking site, and that's how it's grown up, and that's what it remains to be. On LinkedIn, unlike Facebook, there is no wall, so to speak. You have much more control over your message. If you produce a LinkedIn status update, others can comment on that, but that's really the limitation of the degree to which they control the conversation. And in addition, there are no photos, there are no videos, or at least not very many opportunities to share those things, so it keeps the conversation where you want it to be from a professional networking standpoint. In addition, LinkedIn only asks you to share very limited personal information. Most of what you're sharing is only relevant to your professional life. And then as far as clutter goes, there's just not a lot of it on LinkedIn. One of the criticisms that I've heard of LinkedIn is that it's boring, and I somewhat agree with that. LinkedIn isn't the most dynamic thing in the world, but really if your goal is to focus people on yourself as a professional, that's for the good. There's not a lot of work you need to do to direct the conversation where you want it to go, because the conversation's already there. Now, this all comes down to a matter of mindset and what the audience's intention is when they go to LinkedIn. And this is a quote from Deep Nishar, who is one of the executives at LinkedIn. And he says, people, when they're on a professional network, are simply in a different context and mindset. When people go to LinkedIn, they're very focused. They're generally going to LinkedIn because they want to grow as a professional or they want to grow their business. Now, if you compare that to Facebook and the diverse number of reasons why people go to Facebook, LinkedIn is a much more focused network. In addition, I think one of the challenges Facebook has is even if someone's mindset is aligned where you want them to be, it's hard to keep them focused there. Let's say, for example, someone in your audience goes to Facebook with the intention of learning who in their network might be able to help them refinance a mortgage. They log onto Facebook, and the first thing they're confronted with is a photo of their 7th grade basketball team, and they've been tagged in that photo. That changes the conversation pretty quickly, and even if their intent was to focus on something more relevant to the professional side of their life, it's quickly changed the conversation. On LinkedIn, because people's mindset is already where you want them to be, you simply don't have that problem, or at least don't have that problem nearly as often. Now, there's another reason why LinkedIn is a better place to be for professionals, and it has to do with some additional numbers. When you look at income, household income, of users of different social networks, LinkedIn is by far the leader of the pack. It certainly outstrips Facebook. This would be true if you put Twitter there. It would be true if you put any other social network there. Now, this isn't a value judgment. This isn't saying that people who earn more are better people or more worth knowing. And this certainly doesn't mean if you join LinkedIn, you're automatically going to see an increase in household earnings. What this really speaks to is the type of person who uses LinkedIn. And that type of person is a business decision maker. Someone who has the capacity and the ability to influence your progression in your career and to influence the degree to which you can grow your business. Now, this was summed up very well in an article in Fortune magazine back a couple of years ago. The author summed up the average LinkedIn user as 43 years old, making $107,000 a year, college educated, and more than a quarter of LinkedIn's members are senior executives. What that says to me, and I think what it says to all of us, is that there is a much higher concentration of business decision makers on LinkedIn than any other social network. So if you are looking for the right audience, if you're looking to network professionally, grow as a professional, move up in your career, whatever that is, and you're looking for the right audience, it's certainly true that there's a much higher concentration of those people on LinkedIn, and you've got them right where you want them because their mindset is focused on their professional lives. So, understanding that, when I talk to people about LinkedIn, I still get a question. People say to me, well, isn't a LinkedIn profile really just a glorified resume? Isn't LinkedIn really only relevant to job seekers and recruiters? And my strong opinion is that is just not true. Now, job search is one of the things that LinkedIn is best for. It absolutely excels at that, but it's about so much more than that. And this was summed up very nicely by Reid Hoffman, again, the founder of LinkedIn. He says that really LinkedIn is not just about jobs. It's relevant to anyone who provides a service, anyone who depends upon service providers, anyone, in short, who depends upon relationships for their success. That's why this tool exists. And when you're considering the possibilities on LinkedIn, it's critical to remember that it's not just for you when you are in job-seeking mode. It's equally as relevant as to anyone who depends upon relationships for their success. Now, to understand this a little further, I want to talk about the infrastructure of LinkedIn, how LinkedIn is built. And it's built upon a principle that may be very familiar to you, the principle of 6 degrees of separation. You may have heard of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, kind of the same thing. The principle 6 degrees of separation says that we can get to individually anyone in the world through no more than 5 other people, regardless of who you want to get to, who you want to access, whether that's Barack Obama, Nelson Mandela, Taylor Swift, Kate Middleton, whoever it is you want to get access to reach them, you would have to go through no more than 5 other people. All right? It's all about the interconnectedness that sometimes we don't realize we have. And LinkedIn is built upon this very principle. Now, here's a snapshot of my LinkedIn network. All right? What this shows is that I'm directly connected to 935 professionals. Those are first-degree connections. Those 935 are connected collectively to about 130,000 people. And those 130 are connected collectively to about 4.6 million people. Now, I don't want to overstate this. This does not mean by any means that I have a substantive relationship with 4.6 million people. It doesn't mean I have a substantive relationship with 130,000 people. To be quite honest, it doesn't even really mean I have a substantive relationship with 935 people. However, what this shows me is that if I am a good steward of the majority of those first-degree connection relationships, if I manage and really try to enrich those relationships, what's going to happen is I'm going to build an army of allies, people who can tell my story. And they're going to have the capacity to tell that story to upwards of 130,000 people, a number of people that I could never reach on my own. So this is where you start to see the power of this interconnectedness. And really, the most critical word on the screen is the word trusted. LinkedIn, like any other network, depends upon mutual trust. If you're going to connect with someone on LinkedIn, my strong advice is only connect with those that you trust and who trust you. Someone, to put it another way, who can be a resource to you and to whom you can be a resource. We're going to see why that's so important in just a couple minutes, but it all comes down to this matter of trust. If you are building relationships with those you already trust, what you're doing is you're prioritizing your time and your attention on those who matter most, those who you really want to grow the relationship with, and in doing so, that's going to be your gateway to new relationships, and that's going to be much more effective than anything else you could do. Now, one of the things I want to suggest is that when most people talk about LinkedIn, they tend to focus on the profile. My strong advice is that the profile is just the beginning on LinkedIn. I want to encourage you to set up a profile that is at least adequate, all right? But I think doing so is pretty simple. LinkedIn walks you through it, and really profile optimization is a different conversation for a different day. I don't want to dwell on it too much today, but it's really just a means to an end. It's a foot in the door, and it's not the most important thing you can be doing on LinkedIn, and I'll explain why in just a couple minutes. Where I'd like to spend the remaining time is on 5 things, 5 ways that I believe all of us can get more out of LinkedIn. 5 things that really deserve our time and attention. Now, these 5 things presume that you've built a profile that's at least adequate. I think that's important as a prerequisite that you have a profile that people can access and that shares the basics about you. But the 5 things I'm going to discuss next are really critically important in making sure that you're getting the most leverage out of LinkedIn. So let's start with the first one. The first one is pretty simple, but it's a prerequisite to everything that follows, all right? And it's the idea of getting connected on LinkedIn. The goal on LinkedIn should be for you to connect with as many relevant connections as possible. It's not about connecting with as many people as possible, as many relevant connections as possible. And first, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of how you do that on LinkedIn. How do you make sure that you're getting the most relevant connections that you can? Well, very simply, LinkedIn has provided some tools to help you do this. Under Contacts, you'll see a link to Add Connections. When you click on that link, LinkedIn gives you the opportunity to accelerate that process. You'll see that you can plug in an email address and a password for that email address. Maybe it's a Yahoo address, maybe it's Hotmail or Gmail. When you do that, what LinkedIn is going to do, it's going to go find your email address book and then compare that email address book to the 120 million member LinkedIn database and try to find matches. And when it finds those matches, it's going to allow you to, in just a couple of clicks, send connection requests to all of those people. So that's a great way to accelerate the process, especially if you're just getting started on LinkedIn. There's another thing you can do as well. If you are using tools like Outlook or GroupWise or Apple Mail, this is available to you as well. The only challenge is there's an extra step involved. You have to export your contacts and then import them. I don't want to dwell too much this afternoon on the details of how you do that. What I'd like to suggest instead is if this is of interest to you and you get stuck in doing it, please feel free to email me or call me and I'll walk you through it. Today I want to expose you to the fact that this is available to you and it's a great way to accelerate building connections. But if you have any questions, let's handle that offline. I'd be happy to answer those for you. Another way you can accelerate the process is pretty simple, something that I do. I have in my email signature an implicit connection request telling all the people I email on a professional basis that they can connect with me on LinkedIn. My thinking with this is that the vast majority of people I email from my work address are going to be relevant LinkedIn contacts. So instead of trying to keep up with connecting with them one by one, why don't I just attach that to my email and then be diligent about what connection requests I approve and which ones I don't down the line. And I'll tell you that probably 99% of the people I email at work are going to be relevant LinkedIn connections. Now, there are going to be times when you want to connect with people one by one instead of doing a mass connection or automating that connection through a signature line. But there's a couple of things I'd like to suggest that are best practices in doing that. One of the challenges with LinkedIn is a lot of its defaults just aren't very good. One of the things that LinkedIn is going to offer you is the opportunity to make a connection request with a script that says, I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn, and then your name. Well, that's pretty lame. There's really not much to that. For some of your connections, this may be adequate. If it's someone you work with every day, it's someone you know really well, maybe you've been, you've known them since you were just getting started in your career. But for a lot of connections, this isn't going to be adequate. My advice here is that you really avoid using the script and instead personalize those connection requests. This is especially important for those of you who are students or who are newer into the workforce. Maybe you have an instructor, a professor, someone who you had for class a couple years ago. And if you remember that those professors see hundreds of students maybe every year, you might have to remind them how you know them and how they know you. In addition, maybe it's someone you met at a college fair. Maybe it's someone you met at an alumni event. Sometimes a simple hint of what the relationship is and the fact that you truly do know each other in the real world is enough to get that connection request accepted. I'll tell you this, if I get a connection request from someone I don't immediately recognize and they use the default LinkedIn script in the connection request, I don't accept that request because I don't know whether I should trust that person because I don't recognize that I know them, and they haven't given me any reason to see how they can be a resource to me or how I can be a resource to them. So take the time to personalize those requests when you may be looking to connect with someone who doesn't know you all that well, and there's still a relevant reason for making the connection. In summary, when it comes to making connections, what I'd like to really reinforce is the fact that this is about connecting with people. It's not about collecting people. The more people you're connected to, the harder it becomes to manage and enhance those individual relationships. So I'd encourage you to be diligent about this and understand that there's no prize if you get 500 connections or 1,000 connections. You don't win anything. All it does is really scatters your attention. So it's more about quality over quantity when making those connections. So that's what I'd encourage you to consider. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the status update on LinkedIn. All right, status updates on LinkedIn are very much like something you're probably familiar with, status updates on Facebook. I believe that the status update is one of the most important things on LinkedIn. In fact, I think of it kind of as the engine that runs LinkedIn today. Let me explain what I mean by this. A lot of people believe that the profile on LinkedIn is the most important thing. However, I think that if you're depending upon the profile for people to get to know you and understand how you can be a resource, there's some flaws in that. Think of it this way. For someone to know you through the profile, they first have to think of you. You first have to come to mind. Then they have to seek you out. They have to search for you. Then they need to look at your profile and make sense of everything that you've told them. And sometimes that can be difficult. Instead, I think the status update collectively over time is a better way to communicate to people what it is you do and why that might be relevant to them. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, the status update is short. It's about 140 characters maximum. And those little sound bites of information are a lot easier for people to digest than an entire profile. In addition, and most importantly, the status update is automatically fed to your connections homepage on LinkedIn. They can't help but see it if you craft a status update when they're on the site. So you don't have to rely upon them remembering you and seeking you out in order for you to make an impression on them. Now, a lot of people say to me, okay, I get this, but how does it all work? What does it look like? So let me show you that. When you log into LinkedIn, right next to your photo or the placeholder for a photo, you'll see a white rectangular space, and that's where you would populate a status update. Once you do that and click share, what's going to happen is your status update will be shown along with all the other status updates from your connections. All right, this is what they'll see when they go to the LinkedIn homepage. And you can see here that they don't have to do anything but log on to LinkedIn to see this information. Now, there's something else you can do with a status update that gives it a little bit more value. And that is the ability to attach a link to a status update. So let's say, for example, you've read something in your industry that you think would be valuable to your connections. You simply click on that attach a link blue text. What it's going to do is give you the opportunity to make that link part of your status update. Then what you're really doing is using your status update to tell people what's in that link, what they're going to find, and why it might be relevant to them. This is a great way to demonstrate to people that you're keeping up with what's happening, or maybe you're sharing news about your company, sharing news about yourself, or sharing a resource from the web that you've created. Great way to share something of substance, not just relying on those 140 characters. Now, a few examples of what good what good status update content consists of. One thing you can do is very simple. Just tell people what you're working on. For example, today on LinkedIn, my status update was that I was doing this webinar this afternoon. And it sounds like a pretty simple thing, but in posting that as my status update, I was able to hopefully share a resource that was valuable to people. If they want to learn about LinkedIn, they could join the webinar. Showcase a little bit of expertise in a certain area, and give people an idea of what are some of the things that I do professionally. That's a pretty easy way to do it. Another idea is, as I mentioned earlier, sharing something you've read, something you found valuable, a resource, maybe industry news that you want to share with others because you think they'd appreciate it too. Simply sharing advice or opinion can be a great way to use a status update. There's a lot of knowledge that we carry around every day that our connections may not have. And being willing to share that 140 characters at a time can really give people the impression that you're willing to help and you know what you're talking about. One of my favorite types of status updates are questions. I think the question mark's a pretty powerful thing. It invites the audience to get involved. It invites them to be part of the conversation. And when you think that the whole reason social media exists is to facilitate conversations, a question mark is a great way to end a status update if you're looking for input from the audience, if there's legitimately something you need help with, or you just want their perspective on a topic. And then another example is events. Telling people where you are spending your time, showing them that you're investing time in yourself as a professional, or simply giving them the opportunity to connect with you at a real-world event has tremendous value. I think what you'll find is if you think about this, it really becomes pretty easy to share status updates frequently. Now, I want to qualify what I mean by frequently. LinkedIn is a lot less noisy than other social media sites. Status updates should be posted no less than once a week. All right, I think most of us could come up with something to say once a week, but really don't shoot for more than once a day. It doesn't demand that much activity. You don't need to babysit LinkedIn as much as you might a Twitter feed or a Facebook page or something like that. Once a day is plenty, and your audience will appreciate you if you don't overdo it on LinkedIn. So consider what is the most valuable, most important, most interesting thing you're doing on any given day, or that you have to share on any given day that's relevant to your audience, and that should be your status update. Now, there's a couple of things I'd encourage you to avoid doing in your LinkedIn status update. One of them is don't sell anything directly on LinkedIn. Don't be known as someone who's only interested in getting into people's pockets, so to speak. If all you're doing on LinkedIn is selling, then people are going to simply shut you out. They'll either stop reading your status updates, or worse yet, they'll hide you in the news feed, or even worse yet, they'll disconnect with you altogether. You can get away with direct sales on LinkedIn every now and then, very infrequently, but if that's the majority of what you have to offer, it's just not going to work. LinkedIn's really about implicitly sharing how you're a resource and how you can help people, but it's not about direct sales, and that distinction is very important. Now, I know that only a few of you are on Twitter, but there's something I want to share that's become somewhat of a nuisance on LinkedIn. LinkedIn and Twitter now have a relationship where they have sort of a brotherhood, so to speak, and in some ways that's good, in some ways that's bad. There's something that's happening on LinkedIn that is such an annoyance that I've gone so far as to have a t-shirt made that encourages people to not do this. What LinkedIn allows you to do is to automatically have your tweets on Twitter posted to LinkedIn as status updates. Now, the problem with that is the two media are very different. Twitter is very much a real-time, short soundbite conversation between different Twitter members. LinkedIn is a much more substantive platform where it's not nearly as noisy. Because this is now the default, a lot of new LinkedIn members who are on Twitter are this is happening to them somewhat unwittingly. Everything they're saying on Twitter is appearing as LinkedIn status updates, and it's clogging up their audience's news feed. Now, this is bad for a number of different reasons, but here's one example of why it just doesn't work. I logged on to LinkedIn one day, and I saw this status update. I've removed the person's face and name to protect the innocent. But in this case, what I was getting was just one side of a conversation that was happening on Twitter. And it was annoying because it was irrelevant, really didn't help me at all, and didn't help the rest of the audience. And it was only one side of the conversation. It's kind of like when you're sitting in an airport and listening to someone talk on their cell phone and you're only hearing one side of the conversation. It just kind of grates on your nerves. And the same thing's happening here too. So if you're a Twitter user and you suspect this is happening but you don't know how to change it, or you're not sure if this is happening, feel free to contact me and I'll help you get this resolved. It's really something that if you want to make a positive impression on your audience, you need to fix if it's something that's a part of your LinkedIn profile right now. Now, the bottom line with status updates is that absolutely everything you say should be relevant to your work. You're not telling people on LinkedIn that you went to walk the dog. You're not telling them what you had for lunch. You're not telling them about your vacation, your trip to Disney World, if that's unrelated to your profession. This is really about leveraging the degree to which the audience is focused on their professional lives and giving them content that's consistent with that. That's really what it's all about. A small digression, I want to say that the same holds true for your photo on LinkedIn. Your profile photo should be consistent with how you want to be perceived as a professional. It's not a photo of you and your spouse. It's not a photo of you and your dog. It's not a photo of you jet skiing unless you're in the jet ski business. It should be consistent with how you present yourself as a professional. All right, let's talk about another one of these tools, and it's the ability to enhance your profile with applications. Now, this one's pretty simple, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. What LinkedIn allows you to do is share content that exists elsewhere on the web through LinkedIn. Now, when you go to the More menu on LinkedIn and you scroll down to Applications, you're going to see something that looks like this. And there are dozens of possibilities here, ways that you can connect with other web portals to share content by way of LinkedIn. I want to share a few examples, a couple that I use and one that I know is otherwise popular, to show you how this works. One is called SlideShare. SlideShare is a standalone website, slideshare.com, where people can share PowerPoint presentations and other presentations. When you associate LinkedIn with SlideShare, every time you share a presentation on SlideShare, it also gets populated to your LinkedIn profile. Now, in the case of SlideShare, you're not going to be sharing presentations very often, so it's not like the problem we see with Twitter. This is actually great because if you are sharing content relevant to your profession, it's another piece of evidence about your expertise, another piece of evidence that helps the audience learn how you can be a resource to them. And it's automatic. Now, since I have these two things connected, I don't have to do anything but share a presentation on SlideShare. It automatically gets populated to my LinkedIn profile. The same holds true for blogging. If anyone out there blogs and it's related to your professional life, you can have those blog posts fed automatically to your LinkedIn profile. I use a platform called WordPress. And again, if I were blogging about something unrelated to my professional life, I wouldn't do this. But my blog is focused on marketing, communication, social media, so that content's going to be relevant to the audience, so I share it through LinkedIn. And then the final example I want to share is called Box.net. What Box.net is, it's a way of sharing documents through LinkedIn and through the web. You can share Word documents, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets. You know, maybe you've written a white paper that you think would be valuable to your audience. Maybe if you're a student, there's some research you've done that you think would be valuable to showcase your expertise and maybe help the audience. All of those things are fair game. They're fair game to share, and Box.net allows you to do that. So those are just a few examples of the applications on LinkedIn, a few examples of how you can make your profile a little richer and give a little bit more evidence to your experience and your capabilities to be a resource. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is advanced search. And for my money, advanced search is the single most powerful thing on LinkedIn. It really deserves your time and attention once you get established. Now, as I mentioned, there's a couple of prerequisites to what I'm talking about this afternoon. Having a profile that's at least adequate to reflect you as a professional. Really getting as many relevant contacts in place as you can. And the power of those contacts and the power of that interconnectedness starts to be revealed when we look at the potential of advanced search. Advanced search is a very simple thing. When you log on to LinkedIn, you'll see in the far upper right-hand corner, the word advanced next to the search box. When you click on that, you get a menu that looks like this. It allows you to filter a search using maybe a company name, a specific industry, the degree to which you're related to LinkedIn members, first degree connections, second degree connections, etc. Now, to show you the power of this, I want to give you two examples. One that's pretty simple, one that's a little more complex. Let's start with the simple one. Let's imagine that I was an employer and I was looking for someone to work in my IT department. All right. If I went to advanced search and just really filled in only a few fields, IT as the title, 46802 as the postal code, and told LinkedIn I only wanted to search within 50 miles of Fort Wayne, knowing that maybe this is a position I want to fill locally, and then asking LinkedIn to only focus on those first degree connections. What I'm really asking LinkedIn here is to show me who I know that works in IT in Northeast Indiana. All right? Now, these are the results that I would get for that search. It would give me 8 results, 4 of whom are shown here. All right? Now, here's my thinking on why this is so powerful. If I'm looking for someone to work for me in IT, am I better served putting an ad in the newspaper and depending upon luck for the right person to find me, or would I be better served going to people who know that industry, people who work in IT, and saying, who do you know that would be a good fit for this position? And remember, these people that you see here, Marcia, Sean, Sharona, and Mike, are people I know, people who I have mutual trust with. So when I make that call and I ask them to share that information, it's going to be very likely that they're willing to do so. And the results, stands to reason, would be a lot better than going out in the marketplace and see what everyone in the marketplace tells me. I'd rather filter that search through the people I know and trust. Now here's where this becomes even more powerful. Let's imagine for a minute that I'm a fundraising consultant working in Northeast Indiana, and I'm trying to find some new connections, some people who I can be a resource for, who might benefit from what I know and my ability to help them. All I would do is type in a Fort Wayne zip code, stay within 50 miles of that zip code, then click on fundraising as the industry, and then what I want to do is I want to look at my second degree connections. Who is known by the people I know? All right, let me show you what I mean by that. What LinkedIn's going to do, if I were to conduct this search, is it's going to give me a list of people I don't currently know. People like Stephanie Smith, Kristen Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the old model would be for me to pick up the phone and call these people and say, hey, Kristen, you don't know me and I don't know you. Do you want to do business together? And you can see how ludicrous that sounds and why it's not likely to yield success. Cold calling is really not something you need to do anymore if you're leveraging the power of LinkedIn. The reason that's true is because what LinkedIn allows you to do. Let's say that as a fundraising consultant, I determined that Kristen Johnson, the executive director of the United Way of Noble County, is someone that I want to get to know. I think I can be a resource to her. I think I might be able to help her. Instead of cold calling her, what I can do is I can look at the shared connections that we have. Who does Kristen know that I also know? When I click on that link, what LinkedIn is going to do is show me that we have 2 connections in common, Rick Shirk and Jill Perillo. Now, my time is much better spent calling Rick or Jill and saying, hey, can you tell me a little bit about Kristen? Or, do you know if Kristen is in a position where she might need my service? Or better yet, could you make an introduction of me to Kristen? Now remember that Rick and Jill are people that I have that relationship with. So when I make that phone call, it's very likely that they're going to pick it up or call me back. If it's not likely they're going to do that, then I shouldn't be connected to them on LinkedIn at all. And that's why it's important to make sure those first degree connections are truly people you know, because you want to make sure that you can make use of that information and be useful to them. Now, a couple caveats. When you do that, please know that you can't do it every day. You can't call Rick and Jill every day asking them for favors, or eventually they're going to stop answering the phone and you're going to erode the trust that you've earned over the years. In addition, if you ask them to help you out and down the line they ask you for your help, you had better respond. You better give them the time that they gave you. And that's how you're going to continue to grow that relationship. So Much better than cold calling, a great way to make sure that you're getting connected to the right people without doing something that's inherently inefficient. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in the way of tools is recommendations. All right? Recommendations are another thing on LinkedIn that's very simple, but incredibly powerful. Recommendations are just what they appear to be. It's the opportunity on LinkedIn to say something good about someone else's work or have them say something good about your work. And if you ask me, there's no more powerful way to have your story told than by the audience itself, by those you have helped. So I would encourage you to take every advantage of the opportunity to get recommendations from people when you truly deserve them, and to give them when they're truly deserved. I want to encourage you to set the bar high, but when it's appropriate, seek those recommendations out, especially when they're well-deserved. Now, a couple of things that, one of the questions I get asked frequently is, how do you get recommendations? And the first step is pretty simple. You have to do good work. And I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of people miss that step. And they think that just being connected to someone is enough to warrant them a recommendation. Well, I want to suggest that the bar is set a lot higher. Recommendations are the exception, not the rule. They are to be given when someone has gone, beyond the call of duty, so to speak. If you are committed to doing good work, I want to suggest that the recommendations will probably follow. So make sure that that's at the top of your to-do list, is being really good at what you do, and then the recommendations are a lot easier to come by. Now, I do want to suggest that in today's communication environment, you still have to ask for recommendations. Most of them are not just going to fall into your lap. And I know we're very reluctant to do this. We don't really like asking people to help us out in this way, but it's a necessity, and really it's a competitive advantage. A lot of times the only difference between how professionals are perceived are the ones who are good at asking for things and getting what they deserve, and those who sit by hoping something's going to fall into their lap. So I would encourage you to ask for those recommendations. However, you want to remember that timing is everything. If you're a student and you believe that one of your professors would give you a good recommendation on the quality of your work, you don't want to ask for that recommendation during finals week or the week after finals. You want to wait until you presume it's convenient for them to give you that recommendation. In addition, another good way to ensure that you're getting recommendations is being willing to give them. And this isn't simply a quid pro quo, a this for that. It's not about giving recommendations so that the person you gave the recommendation to will turn around and give you one. It's more about being known as a professional who is willing to recognize good work. That makes it much more likely that others are going to be willing to recognize your work and to be able to give you a recommendation. Now, a couple of quotes I want to share that reinforce that. A great quote from a guy named Seth Godin, who's one of the predominant thinkers and writers on communication and innovation. He says, the networking that really matters is helping people achieve their goals so that over time they'll do the same for you. So really the act of giving a recommendation is what this is all about. Really being willing to recognize good work and acknowledge people who deserve to have their story told. If you do that, it's much more likely they're going to help you out down the line. That's where that mutual benefit comes in. But here's a quote I like even more. This one comes from Chris Brogan, who's a writer and thinker on social media. And Chris Brogan says that simply the service you provide by recommending others goes well in both directions. It certainly helps the person you've recommended, but by demonstrating that you're willing to recognize good work, there's a little bit of a halo effect there. I think most of us want to work with people who take the time to acknowledge those that have helped them. And that's where the benefit comes in for you. So, the old phrase, it's better to give than receive, applies to recommendations on LinkedIn as well. So, those are the 5 things I'd encourage you to focus on LinkedIn. Once you have that profile built, spend the time to get connected to as many relevant connections as you can. Make sure that you're using the status update. Look at those applications and see which ones can help really enhance your profile. And then certainly take the opportunity to use advanced search to find out what the interconnections are in your network. And last but not least, make sure that you're taking advantage of recommendations and being generous in giving those. Now I want to turn my attention to a couple of things that I alluded to in the introduction. And those are some things that LinkedIn has put in place that I think are specifically relevant to students and recent graduates. One of these is a portal that LinkedIn launched last summer called Jobs for Students and Recent Graduates. And it's exactly what it says it is. What LinkedIn has done is it's allowed employers, when they post a job on LinkedIn, to indicate that they are open to receiving resumes and receiving contact from students and recent graduates. This really helps both parties. It filters out a lot of jobs that aren't going to be relevant for students and recent graduates, and it allows the employers who want to place those candidates to be known. So this is a great place to go to see what jobs are out there, which jobs are available to you, if you're struggling trying to figure out how you get in front of the right people. Another portal that's available specifically for students is through the LinkedIn Learning Center. Through the LinkedIn Learning Center, there are different user guides, and one of them is a user guide for students. This will shares with you some of the best practices for students in using LinkedIn. A lot of the things we talked about today, you'll hear about those, but some other tips for how students can make the best use of LinkedIn. In addition, last summer, LinkedIn introduced new profile sections designed for students. I think one of the things that LinkedIn acknowledged was that in the past, it was much more relevant to established professionals. It was hard for students to make a case for their capabilities because a lot of the LinkedIn profile was devoted to your job experience. And obviously, if you're a freshly minted college student, then college graduate, then you might not have a lot to talk about in the way of job experience. What LinkedIn did is they said, well, let's make sure that we're giving our members the opportunity to share what they've done as students, organizations they've belonged to, honors and awards they've received, even projects they've worked on, and have them populate with their content with that information so their employers, so the potential employers and other connections can see what they have to offer, and they're not just seeing summer jobs and things that may not be relevant. So that's a great one, and that's something that I think has really stepped up the opportunities on LinkedIn for students. Now this one is relevant well beyond students, but I think it's specifically relevant to those who have less job experience and maybe some good experience in service and volunteer projects. LinkedIn has added the opportunity for us to promote volunteer experience in causes that we've been involved with. Now, I think this is specifically useful if you're a college student who has volunteered in an area that's consistent with where you want to go from a career standpoint. Let's say, for example, that you want to grow into a career in green energy, and you've done volunteer work for environmental causes. You can note that on your profile and have that be a significant part of your profile, which is going to signal to connections and prospective employers that you really have a depth of understanding and a depth of commitment to that industry, to that career, that sets you apart, that shows that you're not just coming in blank to that conversation, that you already have committed to it. So I think that's a critical one if you have invested a lot of time in service and volunteer work, and maybe you need to supplement your career experience with something along those lines. And then finally, and this one I think again has relevance well beyond students, is the opportunity to apply for jobs publicized on LinkedIn with a simple click of the mouse. And that's the Apply with LinkedIn option. What LinkedIn has allowed for is when employers post a job to LinkedIn, they can allow candidates to, with a click of the mouse, have their LinkedIn profile be what they receive in the way of qualifications for that candidate. So this makes it very easy for you to get in the mix on a job. It's something that really leverages LinkedIn's power as a connection tool and as a recruitment and employment tool. So with that in mind, I know I've thrown a lot at you in a short amount of time, but I wanted to really expose you to all the possibilities on LinkedIn, some of the things I think that are most critical, some of the things that I think are most relevant to students, but I want to leave enough time for some questions. So what I'd like to do now is field any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer those. Okay, Thomas asks, does LinkedIn access your email for new contacts, or is it only a one-time thing? Thomas, it's only a one-time thing. What you want to do, that leads to an excellent point though. What you want to do is you want to, just like you would on any social media site, make sure that you're aware of your privacy settings on LinkedIn. I think, Thomas, if I'm understanding the nature of your question, is you may be afraid to give too much away to LinkedIn. You don't want them using that information to market to your contacts. And that won't happen as a result of populating your connections, but you do want to be aware of those privacy settings. You do want to make sure that you're not giving away more information than you intend to give away. And Thomas, if that doesn't answer your question, please clarify. But no, it will only be used one time. It will not be used. It will not give them access into the future. Okay, Rose asks, all my relatives asked me to join in with them, nieces, nephews. Is this appropriate? Rose, my advice would be that you need to look at the continuum of how you're using social media and decide whether those relatives are relevant to you as a professional. Are they people that you want to help in their professional life? If so, I would say yes, connect with them. But if they're people that you're not sure if you want to be connected to them on a professional network, it's fair game to say to them, hey, I would rather make that connection on Facebook or over email. Personally, for me, I make a pretty strong distinction about personal contacts and professional contacts. There is some overlap by all means, but there are individuals who have tried to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I've encouraged them that we connect on Facebook instead, and the opposite is true. There are individuals who my relationship with them is purely professional, and I encourage them to connect with me only on LinkedIn. The reason I do that is because I really don't want to dilute the conversation that's most relevant to them and relevant to me. So those relatives, I think the first question to ask is, are they relevant to your professional life? If so, connect with them. If not, maybe connect with them somewhere else. Okay, Mary has a question. Mary asks, as a middle-aged woman re-entering the workforce after completing my degree 3 years ago, should I use the LinkedIn jobs for recent graduates? Mary, I believe yes. It's worth exploring, if nothing else. I don't think that those jobs are only for people of a certain age. I think they are saying we are open to individuals with a certain level of experience. So I would encourage you to look at it. It certainly can't hurt to do that. So take advantage of that. If you find that it's not valuable, then redirect your attention. But I would say that's a great place to start. Okay, Jason. Jason asks, can you see what employers are looking at your profile? Jason brings up something that's really cool on LinkedIn. The answer to your question, Jason, is not all of them, but LinkedIn gives you a window into who is looking at your profile. If you go to the home page of LinkedIn, on the right-hand side, about halfway down the home page, you're going to see a little module called Who's Viewing Your Profile. If you click on that, it's going to show you some of the most recent people who have looked at your profile. I would encourage you to use that information judiciously. Don't overplay it. It's good to know. But LinkedIn is really teasing you a little bit with information. One of the things that LinkedIn offers are paid subscriptions. And I am not endorsing paid subscriptions today. I think the free LinkedIn model is enough for most of us. However, the paid subscriptions give you better access to things like who's viewed your profile. And if that's really valuable to you, it's up to you to decide if it's worth paying that subscription. But you can see some of that for free on the LinkedIn homepage. It's just one click away. And I want to repeat that if you have any questions about anything I've said, please feel free to contact me. I'm going to put that contact info up on the screen now. If I don't clearly answer your question or you explore something later and you get stuck, please let me know. Okay. John, hi John. John asks, I've had contacts added that I did not solicit or approve. How does this happen? Can I change a setting to stop it? John, I honestly don't know how that's possible. My experience with LinkedIn is you have to approve every single contact that requests a connection. So I don't know if there's a flaw in your profile. Maybe what we could do is get on the phone sometime You could log in, I could log into the same page, and we could take a look at it. But LinkedIn really only does what you tell it to do. So there's probably a setting, if it's happening in an automated way, I'm not sure how that's happening, but it's probably the result of a setting. I don't know how else it would be happening, but I'd be interested in hearing more about that. Okay, any other questions? All right, well, again, my contact info is on the screen. LinkedIn is something I'm a big believer in, and I really enjoy helping others explore it, find out its potential, and leverage that potential. So if I can be a resource to you and I can help you do that, please let me know. If you go to connect with me on LinkedIn, please just mention that you were part of this webinar so I know who you are, and I'd be happy to make that connection there. But feel free to call me or use the email address on the screen to reach out, and be happy to help. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.